Hey, deserving listeners, it's time to continue watching Colt on The Single Life. Let's watch.
You know I've changed. Building something with you, a life with you, means more to me than having a fling or an affair or another distraction.
You've bullshitted a lot of people. Everything you're saying sounds great, but it's just a lot of words. So, what would you say to a counselor?
So every time on the show when they do this, I celebrate. I think, yes, therapy, finally. Whether they show it on the TV show or not, good for them. But then they usually just go to one session and that's it. And it doesn't really help anything. So I'm not going to get my hopes up.
I feel nervous right now. I don't know what to expect. My biggest fear is that Vanessa is going to bring up some issues we might not be able to overcome no matter what.
Hi, Vanessa.
Hey, Brad,
how you doing?
How are you?
Yeah, good to see you.
Colt?
This is Colt.
Hi, Colt.
I've been seeing Brad for about 4 or 5 years, maybe.
Okay, so it's not usually advised that a individual therapy situation be expanded into couple. It can be done for sure as a couple and family therapist who sees individuals, couples, and families, but mainly just couples and individuals right now. Sometimes you can change the treatment plan that way, but we generally don't want to do that. Why? Well, because she and the therapist, Vanessa and the therapist, have a pretty good bond. They've been in therapy for 5 years, and so they know each other really well. And Colt is this very new person in the situation, and Colt could feel like he's the outsider, that the therapist prefers Vanessa over him. So it requires the therapist to really prove to Colt that he's on everyone's side. He's not on anyone's particular side. The other thing that could happen that could be bad is that Vanessa could feel that the therapist is betraying her by listening to Colt. I don't think Vanessa seems like that sort of person, and that is a consideration when we do change from individual to couple or vice versa, is our prediction as to how the clients will react to the various different threats to the relationship that the switch in the treatment plan will provide. The other risk is that Vanessa, at a certain point, she might say, you know what, I want to do individual therapy again. But if Colt doesn't want that to happen, then it won't happen because Colt is now being invited into the client system and gets all the rights thereof, meaning that Colt has a right to the therapist just as much as Vanessa does. And Vanessa can't say, okay, Colt, go away. I want this to be individual again if Colt doesn't want that to happen. So that's another reason why we avoid that, because obviously the relationship between Vanessa and the therapist is a good one, and we don't want to threaten that by allowing another person to have all the same rights of the therapy. Now, I do know that a lot of therapists out there do not understand these ethical considerations and will just switch back and forth between couple and individual and not really think about the legality or the ethical issues. But anyway, there's nothing terrible with this at all. Maybe he's thought a lot about it. Maybe he's had all the conversations with everyone. But let's watch.
Who I am, at least how I was with these other ladies, but I do feel like just for myself, I've changed. Like, you can trust me. I'm not going to do anything to hurt you. I don't want to. Like, I feel like I want to build something with someone. And I know you don't trust me just saying it, but I do feel like I've changed a lot.
Okay, so the therapist is letting Colt talk directly to her, which is good. Anytime I'm with a couple and they start to talk to each other, especially if it is in a healthy way, then I just let them do it. Not all the time, but usually I just let that, look, I'm here to help, but if they're already doing functional things, why would I stick my nose in it? So I think that's what the therapist is doing right now.
In a way, I do understand, but I don't know if he's able to stop that pattern.
So your only hesitation to really kind of make this to move forward with confidence is that he would be shady, that he's gonna be unfaithful to you and do the things that he's done in past relationships.
So, as with almost every single depiction of therapy, whether it's in reality TV or a movie or a TV show, a fictional TV show, I'm always wondering, why is the client there? There's this notion out there in the society that people come to therapy, and I've even had clients do this. They sit down on my couch and they're like, okay, do therapy to me. And I'm like, that's not how this works. You have to ask me for help. You have to ask me to work on. You have to tell me what you want to change about yourself. I'm not going to just change things about you because I want you to change. Like you have to ask me for help with something. So they haven't defined that here. Now, maybe they did prior to the edit, but I'm wondering, particularly for Colt, I mean, we know what Vanessa is there for. Vanessa is there because she wants to trust Colt more, and she wants Colt to change a little bit. She wants Colt to listen to her more. Okay, those are pretty common goals in couples therapy. But what does Colt want? He's a client, and you would really want to, particularly because you don't have a relationship with him, you really want to draw him out. Okay, Colt, what would you like to get out of today's meeting? What do you want? And then when we get into these conversations, I, as a therapist, can address those given what they're telling me. But I'm worried that the precedent or the vibe that's happening right now is Vanessa is dragging her boyfriend into therapy and saying, okay, therapist, change him. And Colt is on his heels saying, I don't feel like that's fair.
We were more just roommates than anything.
What else? What else we need to talk about today?
One issue is the sex thing. Like, he wants it way too much. He says once a day, but it's usually, like, he can...
I'll settle for once a day.
You want it 3-4 times a day.
I'll settle for one.
So this is a common issue in therapy, and it is particularly in sex therapy, where someone has a higher libido than someone else. Someone wants to have sex more, and someone wants to have sex less often. And the key is how do you help the couple to communicate about that? We don't want to target one person or the other and say they're the wrong one. Each person is okay to have whatever preference they want to have about that. But how do they talk to each other? How do they take care of each other? How do they understand each other? And if we're going to change the libido or frequency desire, then they have to perhaps talk more about things. If Colt wants Vanessa to have sex more, let me back up. So one of the things that can happen is the person with lower libido will be targeted and say, okay, how do we get that person to have sex more? Or, and this is dependent on the therapist bias in my experience, so let me start from the beginning. Therapists come from their own world, right? And so they have their own ideas about how often one should have sex. And depending on their own patterns and their own relationships, I have found anecdotally that therapists will either target the Vanessas of the world or they will target the Colts of the world to change, where competent therapists will not do that. So some people will say, Vanessa, how are we going to get you to, want to have sex more often? How do we get Colt to be the sort of partner that you want to have so you can have sex more often? All with the implication of there's something wrong with you, Vanessa. Or different therapists will target Colt and say, why do you want to have sex so often? You've got to calm down. Like, you've got to respect your girlfriend's wishes. Instead of creating a space, which is the key to this, so that the two of them can communicate effectively. Because a lot of times what happens in my experience is the desire to have sex doesn't change, but the way they feel about it and the way they communicate about it does change. So we're seeing right now that a very common thing where Colt is like, yeah, geez, I'd settle for one time a day or one time every day with a little bit of contempt. And then she's saying, yeah, that's just too often. And that's usually what couples will do. They'll be like, you're a horn dog. There's something wrong with you. Or, when you're in a relationship, it's normal to have sex a lot. Like, people will have a hard time being differentiated and speaking from their own feelings. They're just being like, look, I don't know what other people do, but I'm just going to tell you, this is how I am. This is how I would like. I don't know if I'm going to change over time, or I don't know if there's something that needs to change in order for me to change to be more like you, but this is how I am. And being able to stand on your own 2 feet and just being like, this is what I want, instead of saying there's something wrong with you. That's usually the tone. And so I think they're getting into that.
I don't know if I'm a nympho. I've been called that by my ex-wife and probably other girlfriends, but having sex is one of the best things you could do ever. And I don't understand why having it 3, 4, 5 times a day is a bad thing.
Right. It's not a bad thing. Now, some of you might hate Colt and not want to think about him having sex. I don't know. But yes, it's fine. If you want to have sex 3 or 4 times a day, that's fine. But how do you negotiate that with your partner? How do you listen to your partner? How do you find someone who has a similar, frequency rate? And that can happen. So But like I said, often in couples, there is at least a slight difference. And the key is, how do you talk to each other? How do you create safety? How do you account for past traumas that people have been through, or communicating about what you really want? A lot of people have body shame. A lot of people have sex negativity. There's so many barriers to enjoying yourself. On the flip side of that coin, though, is boys are socialized as children and as teenagers and as adults to not be vulnerable with their emotions, right? And so they have all these needs for attachment, all these needs to cry, all these needs to be heard and seen, and to talk about their feelings, and to be cuddled, and to be held, and to be understood. All these things are within every human. And for boys, they're socialized to suppress that. That's weakness. You're acting like a woman. You need to be independent. And society will do that to boys. And so, but we do allow boys, and particularly teenagers, to be sexual. We do allow men to assert their intimacy needs through sex. And so what can happen for a lot of men is they funnel all of their attachment and emotional needs into sex, and a very narrow definition of what sex is, actually, because that's what they're told. It's like, real men have sex in this particular way. And so they have 1,000 different needs, and they're shoved into one particular behavior with someone. And so we could imagine that for a lot of men, they want to have sex all day long because they have attachment needs all day long, but they're all getting shoved or funneled into this one behavior. And you'll see that men will just be frantic, to have sex, because they don't know how to ask for vulnerability and for connection and intimacy and vulnerability / taking care of each other. They don't know how to do that in other ways. And I don't know if Colt is one of those people. He could be a candidate for that, that's for sure.
I would say most of the time it's me, though, right?
Yeah.
It's a tough thing. I got to admit, as a man, and I've worked with a lot of women in my career here, that so many women talk about.
Yeah.
You ready for a little challenge?
Always.
I say don't pursue her at all that way, and just be a badass until she comes to you.
What? Now, okay, they're editing this. Who knows if this therapist were here sitting next to me, maybe like, no, you don't understand. There were all these other things I was doing. I thought that this would work in this way. So, I don't want to hack on other therapists for sure. And I've talked about this with so many people, individuals and couples, about libido differences. And you have to start from the beginning. There's a whole assessment procedure you have to go through. With Colt, I would have to know, do you like other kinds of activities besides intercourse? Because maybe you're limiting yourself to one type of sex, and maybe you can actually get your sexual needs met through other ways. That's just one of 100 different things I want to assess. The other one is Colt able to get his attachment needs met through other behaviors, right? Because I'd want to help him get his needs met, and maybe that will bring down his franticness and his demand around sexual, particular sexual acts. For Vanessa, and that's just 2 of the 100 things I want to assess. With Vanessa, I'd want to assess, what do you want? Do you want to have, is there something that you would like him to do differently? Again, I've just listed 3 out of 100 things that we would have to assess before I would intervene. But without any of that assessment, he just comes in with this intervention that says, okay, Colt, you have to act like a badass. Don't pursue her. With what's the objective here? Is the objective that Colt will act like a tough guy, like a macho tough guy, which I can't imagine. And why would you as a therapist recommend that? And then that's going to attract Vanessa to him. Is the therapist saying you're being a beta male by pursuing and begging for sex? You got to act like an alpha, and then women come to you. I mean, what is happening right now?
Distance creates some attraction sometimes. I think what I want to do is a role reversal. Okay?
Oh, dear.
So I'm going to have you do is actually change positions in your chair just to get.
Okay, so maybe I was hacking on him too hard. So he's trying to address the pursuer distancer. Okay, I think he should have explained that, at least for my benefit as a viewer, which of course he is not beholden to at all. It would have been helpful. He's like, so there's this thing, pursuer distancer, and if you pursue a lot, then it causes someone to distance a lot. And yeah, that is a thing. And sometimes by role reversing, it can elucidate that dynamic and can loosen things up a little bit for people. So we'll see how this goes. But it's just, I don't know, just the way he delivered it of, you got to be a badass. I mean, I don't understand.
Get into character here.
You look great, baby. You want fuck?
Nah.
Oh, I don't know how to be Colt. You go first. You be Vanessa.
Okay, I'm Vanessa.
So Vanessa, you're hesitant about his ability to be trusted.
Yeah. He doesn't confront his problems very well.
So actually, I think this is going really well. Whenever you do these kind of interventions, there's always an awkward beginning, and they had that, but they're getting into it now. And we're trying, I think what the therapist is doing is he's trying to have the two of them empathize with each other, maybe particularly have Colt empathize with Vanessa by being in her shoes. And it seems to be working, actually.
I want to go back to the trust issue and do another little exercise. So what I want to do is just get into what it is you're afraid of. And so go back and forth, alternating this sentence. I'm afraid that.
I'm afraid to annoy you.
I'm afraid you're never going to be satisfied.
That's great. This is a really good intervention. I would encourage the clients to elaborate a little bit more on that. She's saying, I'm afraid you're never going to be satisfied. Usually the core fear, and this is a little thing for everyone to think of, I talk about this frequently, but maybe not in a while, which is one of the core fears that we have is that we are going to be rejected. We are frequently being given evidence, little bits of evidence, particularly if we have traumas in the past where we were abandoned or rejected, that our partner or the people with us don't like us, or they disapprove of us, or they're critical of us, or they're distant from us. And the fear, the baseline fear, the very first emotion that we have, in my opinion, usually is, oh my God, this person hates me, they're going to leave me. Oh my God, this person doesn't like this aspect of me, and that's going to drive them away. And that is understandable because we're social creatures and we evolved as an animal that really needs our people around us because our survival depended on having other people there to support us, look out for predators, give us resources, that kind of thing. And so we are terrified of rejection, particularly from people we're attached to. And when we have that fear, it causes us to have a reaction. Oh my gosh, what's going to happen? And if we're not aware of that, we will transform that into criticism back, or yelling, or distance, or hostility, or something. So the therapist is saying, let's get to your fears. And just say, I'm afraid of. And I commend the two of them, particularly Colt, for going along with this. The reason I say particularly Colt is because Vanessa's been in therapy with this guy for 5 years. Colt's brand new, and Colt's going along with it, which is, commendable.
I'm afraid you're never going to be satisfied.
I'm afraid of that too. Honestly, I get bored in relationships. I get bored in
He has an alpha up placard on his therapy office behind his head. So I don't know what this means precisely, but what it often means, this whole alpha beta nonsense, is you have to be an alpha as a man. You have to be an alpha. You have to, be in power. You have to be decisive. And this kind of mentality is often associated with toxic masculinity, which is some of the things I've been reacting to in this video. I don't know that about him, but we heard two things from the therapist. One was, Colt, you got to be a badass, stop pursuing. And then we see this alpha up thing behind him. Therapists are entitled to their points of view, but I wonder but on the other hand, the therapist is doing great so far. If I didn't know about those two details, I'd be like, okay, these are good interventions. So maybe I need to get rid of my own prejudice there. Let me know in the comments what you think of that placard in the back. All right, well, that does it for that episode of Psychology in Seattle. Everyone out there, please take care of yourself because you deserve it. You really, really do.